Turn with the book of Nehemiah, chapter 5. Nehemiah chapter number 5. If you remember in the closing part of chapter 4, in chapter 4 we had seen that there was certainly some attacks, or planned rather, attacks from the enemy that they had that didn't like them rebuilding this wall. And, I think to me one of the greatest parts of chapter 4, outside of just a personal moment that I just kind of chuckle at, is the fact, when God allowed them to overhear the plan of the enemy. It's one thing the enemy can plan all day long, but God always knows their plan, doesn't He? He always knows the plan of the enemy. He always knows what's going on and what their plan of attack is. But I think to me the greatest piece of chapter 4 is the fact that in spite of that, we saw that the people continued working, right? They did not stop. Which really is a moment of victory for the people. And again, great leadership by Nehemiah to be able to continue to progress and see that the work that they were supposed to be doing was being done, in spite of the obstacles that came their way. As we come to chapter 5 of the book of Nehemiah, we're going to see that there is another hindrance to the work. Listen, and I've said this, and if we don't understand it, I don't know what will, what I can do to help you understand that when it comes to God's work, there is always going to be some sort of hindrance or attempt to stop God's work from being done. Sometimes the enemy uses outsiders. Sometimes he uses insiders, right? It is what it is. And so we've seen the attacks from the outside. We saw discouragement. We saw a planned physical attack that went awry because God's plan was greater than theirs. But as we come to chapter 5, we're going to see yet another hindrance to the work. And at the same time, while we are going to see another hindrance to the work, we're going to see some great leadership again by Nehemiah. And so we begin just in verse number 1 of Nehemiah chapter number 5. It says, "And there was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren, the Jews." Again, we saw them working with a hand and a trowel, and a hammer in one hand and a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. Didn't let their enemies stop them. But here, and you'll see this as we go, there's no mention, and this is somewhat disheartening whenever you look at it from the grand scheme of things of how they've been. There's no mention of work whatsoever in chapter 5. Chapter 3, all about work, right? Chapter 4, we saw the enemy trying to discourage. We saw the enemy's planned attack. But we saw them continuing to work. Chapter 5, there is no mention of work whatsoever in this chapter, which indicates what? What does that tell us? They weren't working. The work has stopped. And so here we see that there was, it says that there was an outcry of the people and their wives against their Jewish brethren. What does that tell us? Somebody's not happy, right? There's a problem. There's a lot of indicators there. I think to me, what we see here, and the most concerning thing, is that the work has stopped because of this. Whatever this is, and we'll see it as we go on through, but there is clearly strife amongst God's people. The enemy could not stop the work of God by direct attack, but the work stopped when God's people weren't unified and working together. I believe wholeheartedly that is, in the New Testament, one of the reasons that we see such a plea. The Apostle Paul, when he wrote letters to churches, he pled for the people to be unified. He told them, I pray that you would be of one mind and one accord. And, I'm also reminded of Jesus as he had left the upper room on his way to the Garden of Gethsemane to fight what I tell you all the time, in my opinion, is probably one of the greatest spiritual battles ever fought, in the Garden of Gethsemane. But on Jesus' way to the garden, his prayer for his children was what? That they be unified. Do you think that unity is important in the work of God? Absolutely. Unity is important in anything we do, right? I don't know about you, but if you've ever worked somewhere where there's not unity, or been a part of a place where there was no unity, it's not really a good place. It's not a happy place to work. It's not an easy place to work. And sometimes there's no work that gets done. Why? Because this one's just working against this one. And that hinders. And so here what we find is that the unity has been disrupted. There is strife amongst God's people. And so the work has stopped. It tells us that there was a great outcry of the people and their wives against their Jewish brethren. And this meant that one was fighting against another. And, listen, when God's people are fighting one another, they certainly aren't fighting the real enemy, nor are they getting God's work done. There's no place for it. Let's be honest with that. There is no place for us to fight against one another. Are we all always going to agree? No. It's just best to go ahead and understand that. There's always going to be times where somebody's not going to agree with the other. And that's okay. But to allow it to come up to a point of contention where there's strife and there's bitterness and there's angry and there's fighting amongst one another. Listen, we're not fighting the real enemy. What we're doing is we're giving Satan a stronghold. Right? And that's exactly what's happened here. They've given Satan that foot in the door. And you know the saying, if you give him an inch, they'll take a mile. Satan, you give him an inch, he's going to take 10 miles. He's real greedy, right? And so if there's fighting, I remember this, and this is one of the greatest things that has stuck with me from our study that we did, I don't know how long ago now, on spiritual warfare. But who is our real enemy? Satan's our enemy. Paul made it abundantly clear that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. There is not one person in this world that's our enemy. Satan's the enemy. And so if we're fighting against each other, we're not fighting the real enemy. And if we're focused on fighting against each other, there's no work being done. Right? And so that's where they are here in verse number 1. So what a change, right? Man, they've went from working with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other, and they're unified and they're getting the work done, to now there's fussing, fighting, and bickering. There's problem. So what led to this fighting amongst God's people? Verse number 2. And we're going to read down through verse number 5. For there were that said, we, our sons, and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. And some also there were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth. There were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants. Some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. So, we're fixing to get into a discussion, because it is what's going on here, about money, right? This is a monetary problem. It's a financial issue, and the book of Nehemiah is not primarily a book about money. It's a book about rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and bringing God's people into a place of peace and security and blessing. However, this money problem directly impacted the work. It directly impacted the rebuilding work. And, a lot of times money problems, or most of the time money problems affect building projects. Why? Because there ain't enough money to do the work, right? Well, is that the case here? But is the money problem, the financial problem, is it because they don't have enough money to do the work? So, right, so we go back whenever Nehemiah left, when he got permission from the king to go, what did the king do? King took care of the financial part of rebuilding of the walls. So this is not a money problem with the rebuilding of the walls. That seems to have been paid for by the king of Persia. You can go back to Nehemiah chapter 2 and see where that he provided the necessary building materials for Nehemiah and sent him with royal guards. The money problems here are different. They were money problems among the people that harmed the unity among the people of God. So this is an individual problem, right? In a sense. It is a bigger, it's not just one or two. And we'll see a little bit as to what led to this. But the people had money problems because they had been working on the walls, right? So they're focused on working on the walls and not spending time providing for the needs of their household. So it's easy to see why things become the way they do, right? That things are not easy. And, listen, if you want to spend much time directly ministering to the needs of God's people and then spending and spreading the gospel, there's a lot of times it will affect your means or your ability to provide. Ministry takes time, and time spent on ministry is time you're not making money. If one gets to a place where ministry is a way of making a living, one should not be, there's a problem there. I struggle. I've shared, I think, this before, that I had a friend of mine that was all excited one time. He was telling me that he was taking his wife to hear her favorite preacher. So I asked, and I'm not going to share that preacher's name, but he told me. And I said, yeah. I said, where are you going? I said, are you going to where they're at? I named the place. And he said, no, they're going to be in Atlanta. I said, oh, what church? He said, no, it's going to be at no, it wasn't Mercedes-Benz, but it was the basketball arena up there. And I said, really? Try to be nice. And I said, how much did that ticket cost you? I don't even remember the exact number, so I won't try to quote it. I said, oh, man. I said, those must be front row. He said, no, those are the nosebleeds. And I thought, man, this is a preacher, supposedly, and he's charging that kind of money for people to come hear him speak. That ain't a preacher. That's a public speaker. That's what that is. And so, we have to understand. But the issue here is that it tells us that there was a dearth. What is a dearth? A scarcity, a drought, a famine, right? Obviously, there's a problem. And so, people have these money problems because there is a famine, which made food what? Scarce, which is going to do what to the price? It's going to drive it up. We've experienced that before, haven't we? We can relate to how that works. I mean, I think we talked about this yesterday at the house. I bought some eggs, and I think the price of eggs are finally coming down. They must have got all those chickens better that were sick, I tell you. Yeah, but it's amazing, isn't it? How whenever there's a shortage, and listen, back when COVID happened, toilet paper, you could have sold it for, some gold bricks. I don't either, and I have my own opinions on that, but anyway. But we know how that goes, don't we? It drives the price of things up, and it's ridiculous, but that's what they are experiencing here. And it was so expensive that some people had actually mortgaged their property to be able to provide food. And, listen, let me ask you this. Is a famine any one of these people's fault? No. They don't have control over all that. It's not their fault. And, it's just not, it wasn't their fault. It just didn't, it affected them, but it's not really the fault of anybody. And yet there may be fault in how, here's what we have to understand. The famine, their fault? No. However, the way the problem is addressed and the way the problem is dealt with does become their fault, right? They have a right way and a wrong way to respond. Instead of fussing and fighting, there was another way they could have handled it. But so they're fussing and fighting because they're having money problems because of a famine that has driven up the cost of food and necessary supplies, and so they're there. However, there's also another issue. There's the king's tax. Government's taxing them even though they ain't working as much. Cost of living's gone up. Sounds familiar, don't it? Right? Read this. If somebody can read this and say, I don't understand it, they ain't living. They're not paying attention to the world around them. The taxes, again, is that the fault of the people? No. They didn't set those taxes. They didn't demand them. And so they're not the fault of those who are hurt by them. Neither Nehemiah nor the people. One of the interesting things is neither one, the people nor Nehemiah, act as if though the taxes themselves are unfair, yet they are still a hardship. I know everybody has their opinions on taxes, and if you really think that they should just be completely done away with, let me encourage you to go somewhere where they don't have taxes. You'll find out real quick that you'd be willing to pay a little bit of extra in taxes. Again, I think they take advantage of people. I'm not saying they don't. But sometimes there's a necessity there, but there's still a hardship sometimes, right? And that's where these people are. They're a hardship. And, they said, listen, they've mortgaged their land. They've borrowed money. Some were forced to sell their sons and daughters as slaves because they had already owed money and they couldn't afford to pay what they owed. So what they have? All they have left are their children. So what do? They give them for payment. That's all they got. And so it's a mess. And the loans they'd taken out to live, those cost interest. Some were in default, and so as a result, they sold their sons and daughters or gave them as payment. As we get down into verse number 11, it'll be indicated down there, you'll see the 100th part. The rich were taking advantage of it. The rich were taking advantage of it. They were making money off the poor. They were charging 12% interest a year. You know, it's not unusual for money problems to create strife and completely disrupt what God wants to do. That's not unusual. If Nehemiah and his people didn't find a way to do what God wanted them to do with their money and money problems, the work of God is going to be stopped. It's going to be done. And the sad thing is, you know, when you look at this in the grand scheme of things, this has stopped, at least temporarily, the work of God without one single shot, arrow, whatever, being fired by the enemy. I want you to think about that. The work has ceased. Did the enemy fire a shot? No. Are they physically having to fight for their lives? No. But there's a problem. And because the way they're handling it, it has caused the work of God to stop. You know, we sometimes want to separate what we do with our money from our walk with God. And can I just tell you, if that's how you live, that's a huge deception from Satan. Buying a home is a spiritual decision, not just a financial one. Taking a job, choosing a career, those are not just financial decisions, those are spiritual decisions. Every one of them will directly affect your walk with God, both now and in the future. You know, if we don't handle money with the right heart and make financial decisions with an eye for eternity, we can make mistakes that will affect the work of God in our lives for years and years. You know, when you get down to it, money problems are rarely only money problems. You know, we often think that, man, if I just had a little more money, my problems would go away. Let me just tell you something. That is a lie straight out of the pits of hell, because it's not ever the case. You know, in fact, it's a proven fact just by looking at the lives of, you know, you go back and look at some of those that have won the lottery or come unto unexpected riches. How'd that work out for them? You got to play it to, you know, to win it. So, verse number 6. And I was very angry when I heard their cry and these words. Who's talking there? Nehemiah. It is, absolutely. Nehemiah hears this. I mean, this is one of those moments that I'm sure as a leader, Nehemiah sat there, everything they've been through up to this point. I cannot imagine that he didn't, when he heard this fussing and fighting and arguing and bickering, didn't think to himself, all that we've been through, and this is what's going to stop us? Everything that we've done. Now, and so, mind you, not all of these people have been with Nehemiah since he left Babylon, right? Nehemiah was the cupbearer in the king's, for the king. He, but he knew that he had prayed and asked if this was God's will, and so he went to the king. The king, I believe, God used the king to bless Nehemiah to prepare him to get there, and so from the time Nehemiah's gotten there, there's been some opposition, and so Nehemiah has experienced that. Don't forget when he first got there, Tobiah and Sanballat were already on the scene, and they already were kind of discouraging him before the work ever begun. And so now here he is, and they're at this point, and he hears this. He's a little hot under the collar. He is not happy with the response and the reaction of these people. He's angry because the money problems were caused in part because of the greed that those wanted to make a profit off of it. So I think there's two things. I think number one, I think he's angry at how the people are responding to the situation. Because no matter what, whether you're in a bad spot or whether you don't agree with or like how things are going, there's a right way and a wrong way to handle those things, isn't there? Always. But on the flip side, he's also angry that these problems even exist because of the greed of those that are wanting to make a profit off of the money troubles of others. Again, how does that work? Well, because those that have the money were able to loan it out, and they're charging a tremendous interest rate on those that are already hurting and suffering. That's taking advantage of them. You know, I'm reminded of a time in the New Testament where folks were taking advantage of God's people. They were taxing them left and right, and they created a temple tax. They made it where you had to come in and buy your animals for sacrifice from them, and all of these things. And you know what? You know what happened to that? Jesus showed up, and you know what he did? He drove them out. He was not happy. And so I see a similarity here to Nehemiah. He's angry. I believe this is a be ye angry and sin not kind of a moment for Nehemiah. I don't think he's sinning by being angry. But he's angry that these problems even exist because of the greed. And by the way, Exodus chapter 22 and verse 25 clearly states that this is wrong. And so if these people are living under the law, they should know very well that this is wrong. They should not be making and taking a profit off of those that are struggling financially. And so Nehemiah is angry because of the lack of unity among God's people. And by the way, I believe that is, for Nehemiah, that was the lack of unity, or unity in and of itself was more precious than any amount of money. I'll just tell you, I will take a church that is unified any day over being a part of a church that has millions of dollars in the bank and is just in disarray. I'll take it all day long. But you can't put a price tag on unity. And so he says, I heard their outcries and these words. No mention made of the work on the walls, but the work is stopped. Verse 7 through 11. Then I consulted with myself. I do that occasionally. And I rebuked the nobles and the rulers and said unto them, you exact usury, every one of his brother. And I sent a great assembly against them. And I said unto them, we, after our ability, have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. And will you even sell your brethren? Or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace, and found nothing to answer. Also I said, it is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen and our enemies? I likewise, and my brethren and my servants, might exact of them money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this usury. Restore, I pray you, to them even this day their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, and their houses. Also the 100th part of the money, and of the corn, the wine, and the oil that you exact of them. You know, I when I read that, because we've often seen Nehemiah's response, and a lot of times, first thing he does is he goes to the Lord. And I'm not going to say he didn't go to the Lord. verse number 7, whenever it says that he consulted with himself, how do you interpret that? What's that? Yeah, he's thinking to himself. He's trying to figure this out. What's that? He's sitting down under the shade tree. Yeah, I think, I think again, and this is just an example to me again of great leadership on Nehemiah's part, that hey, before I'm angry, and before I respond, I need to make sure that I have got myself in check, right? I need to make sure that I'm in a good place, because now, had he responded in his anger, things could have went south. I mean, because by the way, the authority that he had from the king, they ain't no telling what he could have had done to these folks. He could have took them outside the walls that were rebuilt partially and said, you know what, kill them all. And hey, you can think, well, preacher, yeah, it's pretty harsh that you would do. I'm just telling you, when you've done what they've done and you're here and you're working and you're doing this and you see the work stop that you've worked so hard, listen, there's no telling what people will do. And so Nehemiah shows great restraint. He shows great leadership, and he sits down and he gathers himself. He gets his composure about himself, and then he handles business how it needs to be handled. And I think this shows that he's passionate enough to get angry, but yet he's also wise enough to not act until he had thought the matter through carefully. However, he's not going to be passive in this, right? We see that already. He's not passive in this. He's Nehemiah. If there's one thing Nehemiah is not, it's a coward. He is a leader that has backbone. And so he's going to consult, to put it nicely. He says he rebuked them, the nobles and the rulers. So he's confronting those that are in the wrong. And he told the truth. And from the result, we can judge, and we'll see it in just a few moments, that he must have told the truth in love. I think that's one thing, being corrected is not easy for anybody, right? That's hard for any of us. However, it's a little bit easier to take whenever you know it's been done in love, right? So just how there was a right way and a wrong way for the people to respond to their problem, Nehemiah as a leader understands, hey, there's a right way and a wrong way for me to handle this. And so I believe it shows, what we'll see in just a few moments is that he clearly told the truth in love. And again, I think that I can just tell you from a leadership position, Nehemiah teaches that the way that a leader should approach a problem is head on. It's not easy, but it's the best way to handle it. You have to sometimes just deal with it and go that way. But and so he says, that each of you is exacting usury from his brother. What is usury? That's the tax, the interest. It's the interest that is either too high or should not be charged at all. And again, the Bible says that it's wrong to make money off of someone's financial need. That's not, somebody that just wants to go out and buy something extra that's not a need. But if it's somebody that's in need and has, for the most basic necessities of life, should be given the money, not loaned at a high interest rate or interest at all, really, based on what the Word of God says. And again, if it's not a necessity, then the Word of God does not discriminate or say that you can't do that. It's actually permitted. But he says, he makes note that when Judah was conquered, you go back to when they were initially taken into captivity. Nehemiah is going to reflect back on that. And he talks about that when Judah was conquered, many of the Jews were sold, right? They were sold into as slaves to foreigners, and many of them had been bought out of slavery by other Jews. And so he says, really, we've done this. We've bought our brethren back, but yet we're going to basically make them slaves to us. We're going to turn around and enslave them because they couldn't pay off of a high interest loan, and and so he brings that to light. But then he really hits them home. He hits them, right between the eyes with the next thing that he says. He says, should we not walk in fear of our God? Whew, man. If nothing else he had said got their attention, I would imagine that did. When there is zero regard for God's will, you can bet there's going to be a problem. And in this case, listen, this is where many business deals go wrong before God, because there's no regard for His will or His wisdom. And the only concern here's the only concern these people had. They didn't care what God thought about the deals they were making. They didn't care about what He thought about their interest rate. All they were concerned about is if they could benefit from it. That's when people have that mentality, they no longer are concerned about what is right or what is wrong. And when you reach a point like that, you're in a bad spot. And that's where these folks were. These people that he is addressing, these nobles and these rulers, the wealthy people. I mean, these are fellow Jews. And so they're at a point where they don't care. It's just, hey, can I make a buck off of it? Doesn't matter. That'd be like, somebody having a car that they, I've heard stories of people, that's what scares me about buying used cars. But, you can take sometimes and that thing maybe have a rod knocking like you ain't never heard a rod knocking, but they can fix it just long enough to let you hear it. And man, it sounds good, runs like a champ. And then you buy it, and you get down the road. Listen, they knew it when they sold it to you that it was doing that, so guess what? It's wrong on their part, but they didn't care. You want to know why? Because they just wanted to make $1 off somebody. I know we look at that and think, man, that's bad, but can I tell you, that's in a sense, these folks were doing just as bad. These were people in need. They were taking advantage of them. They were, they didn't consult what God thought. They didn't care whether what they were doing was right or wrong. And so Nehemiah, he doesn't come to them and say, hey, listen, I need you guys to consider doing this. I need you to consider returning back whatever you've taken from them. Their land, the interest. I need you to consider giving that back to him. That's not what he does. He doesn't make any sort of suggestion whatsoever. In fact, he tells them, this is what you're going to do. That's pretty bold, isn't it? However, Nehemiah knew that what he was going to tell them to do was what was right. He was not concerned about what they thought about it. Wasn't concerned about how they felt about it. It's a matter of what is right and what is wrong. And, he didn't even ask him to consider, listen, if you feel bad, stop what you're doing. Instead, he basically told them if they had charged unfairly and collateral was taken unfairly, then it needed to be set right. You're going to make it right. Verses 12 and 13. Then said they, we will restore them, and will require nothing of them. So will we do as thou sayest. Then I called the priest and took an oath of them, that they should do according to this promise. Also I shook my lap and said, so God shake out every man from his house and from his labor that performeth not this promise. Even thus be he shaken out and emptied. And all the congregation said, Amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did according to this promise. They agreed. I don't know how well that would go over today, but they agreed. Again, Nehemiah is truthful with them as he confronts them, and they receive the rebuke, and they do the right thing and admitting that they were wrong. Can I tell you, here's how that is. Sometimes we're so afraid of the response we're going to get from people in addressing wrongdoing that we don't ever address it. We automatically assume they're going to get bent out of shape, they're going to get mad, and it may turn into a fist fight. That may not be how y'all take it, but sometimes that's how I think people are going to respond. They're just going to want to fight with me. So we don't do it. When in reality, I think what we would find is a lot more times if we are willing to address problems the right way, you'll find that there's usually a spirit of acknowledgement to their wrongdoing, and they'll want to make it right. But for some people, as long as nobody acknowledges their wrongdoing and nobody tells them they're doing wrong, they're going to continue to do wrong. And if they don't want to receive it, then guess what? Nehemiah handles that too. Because not only does he address them and he calls them on it, and they agree, it's one thing to sit there and say, yeah, we'll make this right. But it's another thing to actually do it, isn't it? So Nehemiah says, listen, and this is Jerry's interpretation of how this went. I appreciate you admitting that you are in the wrong and agreeing to make it right, but we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to make sure. We're going to put some stipulations on this, and he does so with an oath, with a public record of all this. Nehemiah assures accountability on every one of these nobles and rulers. And listen again, sometimes that's what else people need. I'm a firm believer that, and they would never, I would not have admitted it whenever I was a kid. But if you set rules, guidelines, and boundaries, kids need that. Not only do they need that, I believe they want that, whether they would admit it or not. I would have never admitted it. I hated them. Man, I hated them. But I look at them now and I'm like, yeah, I needed that. Whew, they ain't no telling where I'd have been. Same way I need them today, right? This right here is my rules, guidelines, and boundaries. Right here. I don't always like it, but it's for my own good. And so, again, people will never, not always admit it, but they need that accountability. Some people, they're looking for that. I'll tell you, there's sometimes I think that's why some people are attracted to legalistic churches. Because, man, there is so much structure, there is so much rules, there is so much, and it makes them, they want that, they need that, but they're going about it the wrong way, in my personal opinion. Accountability is a missing step. Is Siri trying to talk while I'm preaching? Tell Siri if she's got something to say, she can come say it to me. She don't like guidelines, does she? Oh, she was reading back to us. Yeah. Verse 14 through 16. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year even unto the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, that is 12 years, I and my brethren have not eaten the bread of the governor. But the former governors that had been before me were chargeable unto the people, and had taken of them bread and wine beside 40 shekels of silver. Yea, even their servants bare rule over the people. But so did not I, because of the fear of God. Yea, also I continued in the work of this wall. Neither bought we any land, and all my servants were gathered thither unto the work. So Nehemiah has gone from being angry of the situation, that the work has stopped, of the hardship that's been caused by these nobles and rulers charging an exuberant amount of interest and taking land and enslaving their fellow Jews because they can't pay what they owe, because, listen, they haven't been working to bring home money. They've been working on doing the Lord's work, and so they're taking advantage of them. He addresses the people. He gets that sorted out. And now he's, this is a little bit of a, I don't want to say Nehemiah is not being prideful in any way in this. I think he's simply making a statement about what he's done. And listen, any great leader should lead by example. He should be willing, he should not ask anything of his people that he himself would not do. And so Nehemiah is bringing that point home here by, he talks about it. He says that, from the time that I was appointed to be governor, and so he talks about, he says this is 12 years, right? Remember, he was sent with everything he needed. He says, I have not taken any, I've not eaten any of the bread of the governor, nor has he charged it to sell people. He hasn't tried to take advantage of people. He had everything he needed. He could have, the governors before him, guess what they did? They'd sold that. They made money off of it. He says, I've not bought any land myself. He says, I've not done any of this. He said, guess what I've been? I've been about the work that the Lord has sent me here to do. And he wants the people to be about the same. He wants the people to be on board. And, again, this is, he does so. Why? Because it doesn't matter to him what others do. It doesn't matter how the crowd acted, what the rest of the world thought. Nehemiah lived by a different standard. Nehemiah lived by, what does God think about me? How does God view me? What standard? That's the standard Nehemiah had, and that's what he wanted the people to live by. Nehemiah did what he did. He says at the end of verse 15, because I fear God. I think you and I can say whenever, when confronted by the sin this world takes for granted, that, I do not do so because of the love of Jesus. That's why I don't do the things I do. The things I stay away from them because of the love of Jesus, because of my love for Jesus. Because listen, I love him too much to just go out here and ruin what he's done for me. And so, Nehemiah wants the people to do the same. Nehemiah says, you should fear God enough that you shouldn't do these idiotic things. He says, that's why I don't do them. Again, you and I, we should be saying, listen, I don't do these things because I love Jesus. That's what prevents me from acting a fool and doing stupid stuff. Verse 17, 18. Moreover, there were at my table 150 of the Jews and rulers, beside those that came unto us from among the heathen that are about us. Now that which was prepared for me daily was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also fowls were prepared for me. And once in 10 days store of all sorts of wine. Yet for all this required not I the bread of the governor, because the bondage was heavy upon this people. Nehemiah not only did not take when he could have, he gave when he didn't have to. Nehemiah received a lot of food from the king's provision. Could have sold it for his own profit, but instead he gave it away as an example of generosity. Nehemiah says, I regularly fed 150 people. Now, I'm just going to tell you, today that would be expensive, right? So he's making a statement to these nobles and rulers and saying, listen, you're not being generous by giving somebody money and charging them an exuberant amount of interest. You're not being generous by seizing their land and taking their children as your slaves. That's not generosity. You know, I says, I didn't take of it. But instead, I gave 150 people regularly. I fed them. I took care of them. You want to know why he says he did that? Because he knew the struggle. He knew how hard it was. He knew that the work was heavy. He knew of everything that they were going through. And he was not going to put himself above them. It's one thing that frustrates me, and I'll get off on a little tangent here for just a second, going back about these preachers that charge an exuberant amount of money, and that must be my word tonight, exuberant. I've used it about 10 times, I think. But these preachers that charge this money, and, you know, listen, I could not live with myself knowing some of the things that they do and asking people to send them money. Talking about sowing a seed. I don't know that that's the kind of seed the Lord was talking about, but knowing that there's so many of these cases, and I've heard stories, real stories, of elderly people and widows and folks that didn't have anything, that hit rock bottom. They see stuff like that and they think, you know what, if I'm ever going to get back up from this is what I've got to do. And they send the last little bit of everything they got. Meanwhile, you know what that guy that's on TV is fixing to go do? Whenever he leaves wherever he's at, he's going to get into his private jet to fly wherever he's going next. He's going to go and you know, these guys that have these 25-bedroom homes and 15 bathrooms and, you know, basketball court. Listen, I can't understand that. I can't understand that. I am not against preachers making money and being financially stable and well off and okay. I'm not. It is what it is. That's whatever a church decides to pay their pastor is what a church decides to pay their pastor. However, when you live head and shoulders above the average person, there's a problem there. Nehemiah says, listen, I had everything I could have wanted. By the way, don't forget, he also was not hurting whenever he was the king's cupbearer. I promise you he was taken care of. Promise you he did not live in poverty. But yet he chose to leave that, to come back to Jerusalem, to work alongside of them, and still did not put himself in a position to where he was taking from the people, but rather he was giving back to. That's leadership. That's an example of a generous leader, a generous giver. Verse number 19. Nehemiah, this gets a little personal here for Nehemiah. He says, think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. Nehemiah was not worried. He was not worried about praise from men. Nehemiah didn't feed those 150 people because he wanted the people to ooh and ah over what he did. First of all, he did it because it was the right thing to do. And he had it within himself to be able to do that. Secondly, Nehemiah was worried about pleasing God. And Nehemiah, that was the focus. And, I would say, God obviously used this, but the way this is written, if you go and study much about the book of Nehemiah, you'll find that it's written almost like a diary. And you know what? I'm not sure who Nehemiah intended to ever see all of this. But God obviously intended it to be used as an example. Nehemiah wanted to make sure that he pleased God. He wanted praise. And so he just simply says, listen, think upon me, my God. God, you know what I do. I'm trusting you to take care of me. I'm trusting you to reward me however you will, whatever that looks like. I want to praise you. I don't want praise from man. And, that's who we have to, we got to make sure that the things that we do, we're doing because we want to please God, not because we want praise from man. And so what a great example of again, a great leader addressing a problem of division and strife that was not even, again, it's one of those things that was not even any of the people's fault that were fussing. But there were people that had caused it. So he's angry at them and so he deals with it the right way. And so I'm just going to tell you, when we all deal with things God's way, boy, it sure makes a difference. I think that's where a lot of churches struggle, is that people can't put their own feelings aside and they want to handle things the way they want to handle it, and they say what they want to say. And I'm sure had Nehemiah said exactly what Nehemiah wanted to say when he was angry, probably wouldn't have went as well as it did after he thought to himself, got his composure, right? So, anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions tonight?